Aloha. When you bring up BowFolios for this first time, if you go to the directory um, page, you'll notice that there's a few faculty members already defined. And you might ask yourself, how does that happen? Well, that happens because BowFolio implements a mechanism for initialization of the database when there's nothing in it. And that's something that is a fairly general kind of thing you might want to do. And so I want to show you how BowFolios does it, because actually it's kind of a nice little mechanism. To understand how to do it, the first thing you need to do is take another look at the way new data model elements, in the case of BowFolio, that's interests and profiles, are defined. They're defined via a method called define on this class, and that method uses this thing called destructuring parameters. Okay, so that's a little weird syntax, right? You see the actual argument to the define method is not just a list of parameters, but it's actually an object with a comma-separated list of field names inside it. Okay, and what that does is that allows you to pass to the define method an object, and then JavaScript will look in that object and bind. If it finds a name field inside that object, it will bind this parameter inside the function to the field, the value of the field in the object that's passed. Okay, so a little bit of foreshadowing. Let's look here. Let's say that we passed an object that looks just like this. It's an object with a name field and a description field. The name is software engineering, the description is this. Let's pretend that that object somehow got passed to our define method. Then inside this define method, name would be bound to software engineering and description would be bound to that string, techniques for blah, 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 blah. Okay? So that's pretty cool. And you'll notice that the profile collection has the same thing, and it even has a cooler thing, which you can see here, which is that in the profile collection, if you pass an object that doesn't have a first name field inside it, then we have a default value for the first name field that can be used inside the method. It'll be bound to the empty string in the event that first name isn't a field defined in the object that's passed to it. And just in a similar manner, if we go and look at this particular file here, you can see, well, there's some objects here that have fields very similar, in fact identical to the fields that are required to be passed to the define method of the profile. Okay, so I think you get the idea, right? The reason why if we go to the directory page of a freshly created BowFolios, the reason why we're going to see, portfolios for Lee, Kay, Ado, Kim, and Henry is because this file, which is called initialcollection-data.json, is in fact being loaded, and as part of it being loaded, it's going to define this set of interests and this set of people. Okay. So let's look at a little bit more detail how that works, because once you get a hold of this pattern, I think you're going to find that this is really a nice way to initialize the contents of your collections. Okay, so to do it, what I think we should do is go to, you initialize it on the server side, and so let's start by looking at this initialized database file. And what we have in here is a function that's going to be passed, a callback or a function that's passed to Meteor Startup. It's a function of no arguments, and oops, that's crazy. And the body of it is as follows. It says, okay, look, the collections that we're interested in, and you can see we import them here. We import profiles and interests. These are variables that are bound to an instance of the profile collection class and the interest collection class, which is what we're going to use to access our underlying MongoDB collection. So we've got two collections we're interested in. And then we're going to basically see how many documents do we have in our database. And so we're going to call reduce over this collection list, where we're going to be passed each of these collections in turn, and we're going to get the number of documents inside each collection, add them all up, and so total documents is going to be equal to the total number of documents in this list. Okay, so I'm sure all of you guys remember your underscore library and how to use reduce, and so that should be very easy to understand. So then we just check and we say, hey, are there any documents in our MongoDB database? And the nice thing is, you know, if I were to add a new collection, I just have to import the collection, add it onto this list, and everything else stays the same. So in the event that there is absolutely nothing in our database, then I know that that's probably because we want to actually initialize it. And so I look in this meteor.settings object for the public field, and inside there we're going to look for the initial database file name. And all that means is that we're going to go to the file that we pass as our configuration file whenever we run the system. And so if you look at, if we were to call meteor npm run start, that runs the script. This is the script right here. And so we specify the settings file as being this config settings.development.json. So we go in here, then inside the public field, inside the initial database file name field, we see here's our file name database / initial data collection data.json. Okay, so so if we now go back here, we got that file name, initial, whatever it's called, initial collection data.json. And then we're going to write out that we're restoring the database from this file. And then we're going to call this assets.getText. And assets.getText is just a little meteor kind of thingy, which says, I'll go inside this private directory and get whatever it is you asked for. So what we asked for inside that, that directory is the contents of database initial collection data.json. Okay, that's how that works. And then we take that value, we pass it to json.parse, which basically gives us a JSON object from the textual contents of that file. Okay, now that we've got that JSON file, we simply call each for both of the collections in our collection list. We're going to be passed a collect. We're going to take this collection and we're going to invoke restore collection with the collection that we're interested in and the restore JSON file, which has everything that we want to restore. So let's look at restore collection. It takes a collection, it takes a restore JSON. So what we do is, the first thing is we need to get the definitions that are associated only with the collection of interest. And what we're going to do there is we're going to find out the name of the collection by calling this right here. And then we call this get definitions file that's going to find the data in the collections that have the where the name of that is equal to the collection name. Okay, so if we look at initial collection data, you can see that we have a name field called interest collection, and then so this object, right, has two fields: the name, which is the collection, and then a contents field, which is the array of the objects that we can pass to the constructor. And then if we look down here, we've got another object. The name is profile collection, contents, the list of things that can be passed there. So if we go to here, we get the definitions, and then that's that array of objects. And then basically what we do is, now that we've got those definitions, we're going to call the each method, which will iterate through all those definitions, get a single definition object, and then we invoke the define method of that specific collection with that definition object. And that's how it gets restored. Really cool, I think. Now I'm going to give you a little Easter egg notification, which is that I'm showing you a one-way approach, which is given that we have constructed somehow this JSON file which contains the contents of our database, we now know how to load it in. Wouldn't it be cool if we could take an existing Mongo database after many people have updated it and output this file? Okay, well, that's just going the opposite way, right? That's going from an actual collection to spit out a JSON file containing its contents. And I just want to tell you that there is a file called dump1, and what it does is a method called dump1. It's present in both the interest collection and the profile collection. The profile one is a little bit more lengthy, the method. And what this dump1 does is it takes an object, a doc ID, of an element of this collection and returns an object containing all the fields. Okay, so I haven't implemented here all of the mechanisms that's necessary, but imagine you had a method which would iterate through every element of a collection and call dump1 on it. What would that do? That would return an array of objects representing all of the elements in this collection, and these objects are basically exactly what you'd need to pass to the define method in order to reinstantiate it. So if you were to then take that array and somehow dump it out as a file, as a JSON file, you'd have represented in JSON the contents of your database in a manner that you could then read in just the way we just did and reestablish your database. That's why actually there's some methods called restore, because in fact that's where this little piece of code comes from, is that mechanism of enabling you to dump out the database and read it back in. Mongo, of course, does have mechanisms to do this that are built in, but when you have cross-referencing and so forth, it can get a little problematic to kind of understand what's going on, and particularly if you have errors in it and you're trying to fix things. I find that this particular approach, where you kind of hand roll it, it's so simple to do in JavaScript, as you can see, that I think there's a lot of benefits to just doing it yourself, and then you've got control over what happens, and life is good.